So, if you, like everyone else on Earth, has been playing Helldivers 2 obsessively ever since launch, then you may have noticed a little bit of a drama that went on late last week, after the much-awaited patch notes were released, and after one of the developers made a bit of an antagonistic statement, shall we say. This combined with the fact that the patch notes were primarily nerfs to effective strategies that were meta at the time, and the fact that the mech suits were perhaps not what everyone had anticipated and expected, led to a fair bit of general unrest, shall we say. And I want to talk about this because this, if there is any threat to Helldivers 2 as it stands right now, it is first and foremost the developer versus player mentality that I have seen creep into a fair few games in the past. So, at this point, the drama is in essence already over, and I wanted to wait to see for the full reaction of it all to work out, as there have been pleas for unity, of course, as the adorable cat here, but also a fair bit of salt having emerged after the antagonistic comments. Arrowhead refused to buff mechs for years. To anyone saying that they need to improve the mechs, they're probably not going to. There really was no need to lie like this. A heavily armored walking exoskeleton. It's not very heavily armored, no. And Arrowhead apparently not putting all of the changes in the patch notes. Now this in all due likelihood simply just has to do with, well, character limits, I'd imagine, and the fact that not everything needs to be spelled out, and the developer in question, it is very important to point out, has already apologized for basically just being a bit hot-headed, right? So everything's fine, right? But this is also boiling over a little bit in the stop being so meta direction of things as well. So let me talk about what I mean when I say developers versus players. Because my favorite example of this is Games Labs, without a shadow of a doubt. Now, Games Labs have made some excellent strategy games, many of which I have played and thoroughly enjoyed, but one of their best and worst creations is Ultimate General's Civil War. It's an excellent game, in all due honesty, which I hardly do recommend, but it was rife with this, where the players would come up with some way of beating a level, or beating a challenge, or overcoming some great obstacle with apparent ease, and then bragging about it to the developers, going, oh hey, look, I beat this level with no casualties at all. I wiped out the entire Union army. Ha ha ha. Aren't I good at your silly, unbalanced video game? And the developer would then respond in a little bit of a huff, like, how dare you do this? And then they'd change it in the patch notes afterwards to increase the number of enemy troops, or increase their reinforcements rate, or in some way make the game harder, because some people who tried very hard managed to beat it. And this became an escalating conflict between the small percentage of players who were constantly finding new ways to beat parts of the game quicker and more effectively than ever, and the developers trying desperately to shut it down. There were some points at which I believe they doubled the number of enemy troops on a map and made them arrive earlier, because people had figured if you simply rushed a point early, very early, with like mass cavalry or whatever, just ran towards it in this strategy game and captured it, you could avoid the entire battle with a victory. And there was like, aha, look developers, you call this difficult? You think this is a hard game? And the developers took this very, very personally. It made the game unreasonable and absolutely ridiculous in many ways, where if you're playing a campaign, every turn the enemy will receive countless reinforcements, countless elite reinforcements. Even after wiping out the enemy army again and again and again, they only seem to grow stronger, until eventually winning a battle was actually an active detriment to your ability to win the campaign, because to win the battle meant that you had to fight the battle effectively, and you had to take casualties in turn. So if you wanted to wipe out the enemy army, you could, but you would actually actively be shooting yourself in the foot by winning as hard as you could. This has pretty obvious problems, and in a game like Helldivers 2, there is a real danger for this, because on the one hand, you have a relatively inexperienced developer. This is only, their second title, the second entry in the Helldivers 2 franchise, in a completely different engine, in a completely different playstyle, with a completely different point of view, and a completely different level of success. It might be very easy for them to see a handful of players that can grow rather toxic, kind of take over the discourse. And it then appears to the developer as if the entire community is filled with abusers and metagamers like this here. Kicked from Helldivers 2, Arrowhead wants your solution to the toxic problems. So the developer basically acts like, okay, it's a bit of a problem, people are being assholes, if you don't bring the meta build, they're just going to kick your ass, and this is understandable, because this is a grindy game. You need a lot of resources, you need a lot of difficult to find resources, you need medals, you need XP, you need income, you need all kinds of stuff. And if you bring one moron on your team that just brings like nothing but incendiary weapons, you are going to have a far harder time. Your ability to progress in the game is going to be delayed by bringing a tard. And so obviously, people grow rather hostile towards tards. This hostility then escalates until you're simply being kicked for not bringing meta weaponry. This was seen in Overwatch 2 as well, and it's a problem really without a solution, frankly, because the problem is baked into the game. You have a very competitive game that people want to do well at that also has a grindy mechanism. And so what are solutions? Well, there were many solutions made by the community. This is people on Twitter, not the developers, mind you. But a lot of them might lead towards... one option would be vote to kick, another would be only allow someone to be kicked with X amount of team kills, or if they've died a ton and are slurping up all the redeployments. Like, okay, so now you're beginning to limit other people's ability to play the game. Unless the person on the team is so bad, he meets an arbitrary limit at which point you can kick him. Like, this isn't a solution, this just makes the game worse for the people who are actually trying, right? Would it be possible to apply a way to penalize someone for kicking X amount of times within a given time frame? Say someone has 10 kicks within 30 minutes and gets flagged. Again, now you are being penalized for being, no, I want to play the game, I want to grind, I don't want the retard with a flamethrower on my team. Should you be penalized for that? Did you do something wrong? Because, of course, at no point are we talking about the people doing the nonsense, deciding to bring the meme builds when other people are trying to play the game. Because this is a two-way street here, alright? This is definitely a two-way street. You have people who simply want to get through the progress, and their goals will inherently clash with the people who just want to play for shits and giggles, alright? And what is the solution to this? God only knows. But if the developers then start taking anti-player decisions, like adding in a flagging system, or adding in arbitrary limitations to kicking people, etc., that will further antagonize the player base who just want to play the game. Good. And these are then the meta people who are then going to look at every mistake and are going to leap upon it. That are going like, you said the exosuit was heavily armored. Why did you lie to us? Bearing in mind too, lie like this. Can we have full patch without stealth changes? Refuse to buff mechs for 10 years. All of these are rather negative titles, aren't they? Now, this isn't intended as a negative post, mind you, as he explains down here, but I'm saying that these all sound rather antagonistic. And if the developers, again, have a history, even if they did apologize for it, or perhaps taking things a little bit too close to heart, you can see where the problems might begin to arise as you create a highly competitive and highly toxic community that then feeds back into the developers who have a very particular idea of how you're supposed to deal with things and want you to have certain difficulties and problems. Like, okay, the railgun was too good, right? We're gonna nerf it. That's gonna affect the competitive community. They're gonna go like, oh, how dare you do that? Now I'm gonna have to find some other thing to abuse. And then the developers look at that other thing. I was like, God, why are you abusing that now? Well, you took away the other thing I was using, so I'm going to use this. But now we're going to have to nerf that. And so the wheel goes round and round. It is a situation that requires a great deal of finesse on both parties, particularly in the case of a game that isn't actually done right now, which Helldivers 2 is absolutely not. It is very clear that you are supposed to have a lot more gear and a lot more options to deal with some of the challenges that the game is already throwing at you, with a number of high-level vehicle spawns at higher difficulties, for example, or biotitans and so on. Without having access, the mechs were actually a godsend in that regard when it comes to the bugs, but the mechs also die within 2 nanoseconds against the robots, so clearly they didn't quite think that through, and a decent solution might be to go, okay, we're gonna give you a mech that is actually specialized to deal with the robots instead. It's actually got a forward shield or something, loads of armor, but only one gun that then has the ability to penetrate the Hulks, for example, but takes a lot of ammo to kill them. Something like that, right? Now, again, this might be me making a mountain out of a molehill. In fact, I hope it is. But I have seen these tendencies before, and I'm already seeing the tendencies begin to emerge in the Helldivers 2 communities, and with popular games like this, you're also going to have a tremendous amount of coverage around the game as well, which will further the seeming need for the developer to do something, to implement some kind of change now, to fix it, without it perhaps being the perfect solution. So all I'm really saying is, developers, think about your players. Think about the game you've made. Think about the time investment you've already made your game centered around. The amount of time required to level up, the amount of time required to upgrade your ship, the amount of time required to gain medals to get the upgrades, the amount of time required to perhaps complete the battle pass thereafter, etc., etc. And the wish for a lot of people to play as effectively as possible. Before you start worrying too much about the toxicity in and of itself, and before you start worrying about the coverage surrounding the toxicity to begin forcing your hand. And for the players too, well, try to bear in mind that whilst you yourself have rights too, because this is something we often forget, right? Toxic players have rights too, alright? They bought the video game, they want to play it a certain way, and they are actually entitled to try and play it that certain way. If they make a lobby and they look for a group, it is actually entirely within their prerogative to go, no, you don't get to bring the meme build. But you might want a way to advertise that, customized lobbies of some sort, perhaps, some way to make that clear, or perhaps special markings, some sort of system to make that obvious, because the toxic players are not actually inherently the issue here. The gameplay is the one at fault, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm just saying that is the underlying reason. And so since that is unlikely to change, being, by design, you're gonna need to find a way to ameliorate the consequences of that without starting an arms race between players and developers. Particularly developers, as that is an arms race that the players are going to win. Simply because there's a lot more of them, and they have a lot more autistic time on their hands. So, everyone, take a deep breath and relax, and hopefully a decent solution will materialize. I can but hope, eh? Until next time, I've been Arch, thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.